because not everybody's from Melbourne Uni, and those of you that are from Melbourne Uni may not be familiar with the structure, I thought I'd just very quickly give you a snapshot of what the course looks like. I teach on the early childhood, the Master of Teaching Early Childhood stream. We have a very small academic team, and the number of candidates on the 2-year program settles at about 95 each year. Our course structure includes 4 semesters. 3 semesters give the teacher candidates a qualification to teach kinder. That 4th semester they can choose to take either the primary option, which then qualifies them to teach children up to age 8, a research option, or alternatively they can take a professional development option. Then there are a series of elective subjects that they can choose from the MEd degree. The focus in our course is very explicitly on evidence-based interventionist practice, and we already have very close links with academic skills and with library services. So we really see academic skills and library services as being part of our team. Representatives come to our course committee meetings. We schedule in visits from academic services or from the library into sessions that we provide for our candidates from Prac Prep, and we work very closely. Another point that's worth mentioning, I think, as in this brief snapshot, is that 50% of our cohort are international students, and of our local students, 50% are here on permanent residence, and so we can assume that they come from an educational background which is not Australian either, and that in itself can bring some challenges. And I see that all my bullets have jumped. So successful candidates, what do they do well? So I'm looking at the what do candidates do well when they're successful, what are students doing to make them successful, but then the next question which I'll address is how. So for their academic work, which is what I'm going to focus on today predominantly, the most obvious one is they answer the question. When we develop our assessment tasks in the early childhood stream, I would say most, if not all, of the assessment tasks are referred to academic skills first for vetting, so that we can make sure that there's no ambiguity in the way that the question is asked, that the candidates know what's expected of them, so that the process is transparent. We're not there to trick anybody, we're there to facilitate learning through those processes. We've also developed already with academic skills rubrics for all of our academic subjects. And one of our tasks for this year is to develop a rubric for assessing candidates while they're on prac. So we are quite, I think, transparent in our expectations of candidates in order for them to be successful in their work. We need our teacher candidates to use the resources effectively, that the reading, the evaluating, the discussing, whether it's written or spoken, the referencing is all done effectively, and again we rely very closely on academic skills to support us in that process. Something that has become an issue that we emphasise with them is that we need our students to use recommended texts before they just go to the World Wide Web, because we sometimes find that we've selected very carefully the readings that we're wanting them to use to support their learning through the process, and we'll get something really out of left field that either you have to read first yourself and is obviously time consuming, or else it's just really not on topic, and we don't see that as being productive use of the effort that's been put into developing and designing the course. We ask the candidates to show evidence of research, but also evidence of their own thinking and of their own voice in their academic work. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. We ask the candidates in their written work to align their thinking and their professional practice with theoretical perspectives and to justify the decisions that they're making in choosing those particular theoretical perspectives. We ask them to manage their time effectively, and given that a lot of our candidates are second or third language English speakers, this is difficult because there's a lot of reading to do, there's a lot of writing to do, and we really encourage them to be planning their time right up front so that they're able to keep up with the reading, and then they're planning ahead for their assessment tasks. On that basis as well, what we've done, and we do every semester, is we schedule the assessment tasks that they don't all land on the candidate's desk at the same time, that we plot them across the subjects across the year so they can actually manage that. We expect them to use appropriate academic writing style, in terms of their essay structure, the in-text citations, the referencing and the word count, and again for candidates that are finding that difficult, they get support through the course and through the feedback that the academic staff provide them, but again we work very tightly with academic skills and supporting us in that area. As an aside, because we have rubrics already and we use Turnitin, I think, in almost all of the subjects on the course, Travis's presentation earlier was interesting because what he raised for me was opportunities to kick that up a notch. And one of the things that I'm looking at doing this year perhaps is getting our candidates to submit through Turnitin, but then to upload their submissions to a discussion board or sort of a platform that they can look at each other's work, so that it becomes more of an interactive and collaborative learning process rather than sort of like a uni track. Two last points. Our candidates, we expect them to be willing to engage with critique and to incorporate suggestions in future work. And finally, to be independent thinkers, which is kind of linking back to that third point about using their own voice. And it was really at that point of independent thinking that I got stuck, to be quite honest, in thinking about what I was wanting to speak to you about today. Because independent thinking is a big ask if you're not used to having to critique other people's work, or if you've not been raised or sort of grown through an educational system where you're asked to evaluate and reflect on your own thoughts and critique other people's thoughts and bring them together. That's quite a sophisticated and complicated process that we're asking our candidates to do effectively. Because I changed the format of the slide. And so, this was the slide that I added this morning because it's really been bothering me. In fact, what we're expecting of our candidates to be successful is more than just independent thinking. And I think this is really for the student that sort of hits the 6 out into the crowd. What they're able to do is work multiple layers of personality traits and understanding and strategies into, that's why I chose the gyroscope as an image, into a sort of a context for their work, so that they have a high degree of motivation and a high degree of engagement with the content. You know, we can't make them interested in the course. We can present it in a way that we hope is interesting, but that's really what makes the difference, I think, between a good student and one who's really excelling, is that we see that. A high degree of self-efficacy, which again we can teach through the content and support them developing a high degree of self-efficacy, but that's one of the key characteristics, I think, of a very successful student. Highly reflective practice, which is difficult. It was difficult for me to get to this point with these slides. It's difficult with people who aren't used to doing this type of work. I think that's a key characteristic. The very successful candidates are able to demonstrate that they can integrate learning across all the subjects and weave them together. And I think this is where our capstone subject is going to be great, because it's going to help with that process. But that's difficult. And for us working in the early childhood space, I think the candidates that do extremely well are the ones who are able to recognise the impact of early childhood learning and developing on that individual child, on community and society, a little bit broader on politics and economics and sustainability, and these are global issues. So it's kind of the candidate who does really well is the person who's able to take sort of a bird's eye view of what they're doing and how they're doing it and why it's significant. And these are skills, I think, that come over the course of the 2-year course. I hope they do. And certainly our candidates that are really successful are the ones who are able to come out of the process having some kind of sense of those things. On that point, I wanted to make one last point before I open this for questions. I have a particular focus on supporting our international students on the course, and we have a lot of them. And for those international students, it can often be quite a difficult philosophical shift in how we approach early childhood education in Australia compared to the background they've come from. I also supervise some of the master's research students who've selected that final semester special research project. And I refer almost all of my master's project students to academic skills for support as well. Because what they then do is, when I say they, I'm actually speaking to our reader of post-apocalyptic fiction, I believe. Well, what he then does... I don't know what you're talking about. What he then does, you can explain later. What he then does is put the polish on it and help with refining the structure and refining the writing. Which I don't have the time, or to be quite honest, the skills to do as effectively as he does. So for us, one of the advantages of working so tightly with academic skills and so tightly with the university and with the library and having people in our team, and we really see them as being in our team, is that we see that we're supporting the whole learning of the candidate rather than just kind of getting them through the courses, through the subjects in the course. And that is about as much as I had planned to say. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Can I just make a comment on that last point you raised? And I work strongly with early childhood, and it's a model of almost best practice about how a department within a faculty takes on a service such as academic skills. They are fantastic at it. I mean, you heard what Caroline said about getting assignment briefs vetted and getting what she also didn't mention was we also go on and do targeted assessment supports. And we also work very closely. What I'm trying to tell you is that this is a faculty, a school which gets it right on every level, which makes it easy to work with. But the fact that, what was your last point? What did you say?
Post-apocalyptic fiction?
No,
the whole student, and sort of rather than just meeting subject requirements, that they're able to integrate the information and learn themselves through it.
Yes, the whole thing. And no, we are, sorry, that was what it was. We are made to feel a part of what they do, not just, oh, here's academic skills, quick, say your bit, now get on to the important stuff.
Yeah.
What we need to talk about, which is what the experience is in some other areas. It's not in this area, which I think makes a vital difference for, and I think it's something came up at the All Conference, you might have talked about it, Kate, was this in your session in day one about feeling valued within the space you're working within the university, and part of that is what you guys get really right, which I think is important.
And Steve and I were just talking before I started, one of the things that I found interesting with my research project candidates, and in order to be eligible to take that subject, they have to get a minimum of 75% to be allowed into the subject. So you're assuming that these are candidates that have a strong academic skills to start with. It interests me how in the beginning when I put it to them that I'm going to refer them to, in fact, I put it to them right at the very first meeting that there's a good chance that I'm going to ask them to come and visit Steve at Academic Skills for some support. And I can see that for some of them it's like, oh, I don't need this, I'm here already, what are you talking about? And yet without fail, the feedback that we get from them is they wish they'd known about academic skills sooner, they wish they'd spoken to academic skills sooner.
So that seems to tap in with a feeling that came out of the student panel discussion, which across the board students seem to perceive help as something that you shouldn't be necessarily
needing
or as needing. But really, maybe that's something as a university, as a faculty or whatever, we need to really work on and changing those perceptions of not just academic skills, but all the other support services. That they are there to help and develop you and do even better, etc.
Some of it is that kind of cultural carry-on, isn't it? Once it's sort of established, it is okay to go. But the other one too, we often give out, I think, mixed messages about being an independent learner. Now you're at university, you're supposed to blah, blah, blah.
That is a good point.
We always try to say being an independent learner is actually knowing when and where to get the support you need. You're in charge of it, therefore you go here, you go there. But it's a really difficult thing. As I said, those mixed messages, because that's what came through this morning. People kept talking about a seamless service. I think that's a really important one, but I also think the same message. That's what a university thing is a very important stance too.
And I wonder too, are we right for time? Yeah. I wonder too how much of it comes down to the individual candidate's own educational history and perspectives, because I came back to do a master's as a mature age student and then moved straight on into a PhD, and the reason that I find it interesting really is the very first assignment that I submitted as a master's student at the age of 40, I put no references in, like not one, because it hadn't been an expectation when I did my undergrad degree back in the 1980s or whatever it was, and if it was, I'd forgotten, and it's I think that part of this process is also taking responsibility for your own learning as an individual and recognising where the gaps are and seeking out that support. And maybe some of that's a cultural thing that...
Have you found, we've had this discussion before, you've found it for yourself as well though, haven't you, coming into a new culture?
Absolutely. And I came into this culture speaking English as my home language and having studied and actually having worked for educational publishers. But when I learnt to write an essay, I was taught to write an essay differently. So you kind of built your argument and then summarised at the bottom, then built it further and summarised at the bottom, whereas the way we write is different these days. And I think, again, as a postgraduate course, people may not have studied just last year. They may have not studied sort of quite a long time ago, and the actual process has changed. So I think that that's a really helpful. I just think academic skills is great. So the support that we receive and that I've received personally has always been great. So it's been a real honour to be invited to speak today. Thank you. Any other questions?
Still got time for questions, comments?
I've got not so much a question about academic skills support, but academia in general, and I've just been talking to many students from Europe who say that when they write an essay, they are not asked to reference and they're asked to put forward their own ideas from their general learning, and their essays are much more about what they think and they know. And I'm just wondering if you think in general that maybe the pendulum's swung a bit too far in Australia, because I know you come from a different background in a different country. If we're asking the students to reference almost everything that they say, or
That's an interesting question. At the risk of sounding like Travis, my first answer would be no. I think in the context of the course that I teach on, which is very explicitly relying on evidence-based practice, we know what works to support children's learning and development. And the reason we know that is because there's been a lot of research done in that space. So what we're asking our candidates to do is if they make an assertion about something, they need to tell me on what basis they're making that claim. And I think that in the space that we work in, that's important. So this is one of the reasons where it becomes tricky with this own voice issue, I think, because that's a difficult space to negotiate. And I think it's a really sort of a high-level skill that not many people come into the course with, being able to draw on other people's theories and then say, well, this is actually what I think. And that's really what I found difficult with this presentation today. Like, I know what candidates need to do in order to get the good marks, but how do they get there? That's kind of a different kind of thinking, and that's difficult. So I think that it's important that they acknowledge source consistently throughout the text, whether it's theory or whether it's research. I think they need to do that.
yeah, I wasn't suggesting that, but I was just wondering if we don't encourage enough of that thought, the students' thought as a result of their readings.
Yeah, it's hard to generalise. Does anybody else have a response to that?
Well, from what I know in education, that happens a lot though, then like when you write reflectively about what you
Exactly.
teach in placements or whatever. This is what I did, and this is what I've learned from that, and this is the theories that I apply.
Exactly.
But, what was the outcome and what will I do differently next?
Exactly.
And I think you've got that in education probably more than in a lot of other disciplines.
But I guess that balance, what you're saying is also really resonates a lot, because you get also a lot of students with more theory-based stuff who are saying, I'm really struggling with the weight of reference versus my voice, because you're telling me my voice needs to be present in this, but you're also telling me I need to put 25 references in it. So it's that balance.
And I think what I'll come to what we've done in our course as well is there's a requirement for our candidates to write a weekly reflection. And in that they can then talk to what they think, and there's that kind of interaction and conversation that can be going on a weekly basis between the academic staff and the candidate in that process. But it's a fine balance.
Well, I just tell them that originality, lies in the way that they explain what somebody else said.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So it's not
That's
about
the art of writing, I suppose.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Caroline. That was fantastic.